In my first video, I said Bubble Rock is a name that I made up for a building product that I'm building with because that's what it's made of, bubbles and rock. Bubble Rock is much simpler than the name it's currently known by, Autoclaved Aerated Concrete. Even the people that make it know this is a terrible name because they typically either use their own made-up name or the abbreviation AAC. I made the case that the abbreviation AAC is almost as bad as saying the whole thing, and that the name of this building product is the worst aspect of it. So I used my own abbreviation for Bubble Rock AAC. I call it Braac. Out of every building product we could possibly build a house with, what type of material is Braac? The C in AAC means that this is a type of concrete. Let's look at what concrete is. Do we actually even know what concrete is? And compare it to every other type of material we could build a house with. I made this chart of our possible building materials starting from the smallest little microscopical parts they're made of to the largest, but it's not complete. A common building material, steel, would be to the left of wood. The components of steel are just atoms, so that's as small as we can get. At the other end would be carved rock. That's not very common these days because we tend not to build castles and pyramids anymore. It's really expensive. As a side note, Joel Osteen, this is not a flex. This house is just built with the same things my house is built with. If you really want to flex, use solid stone. That's an impressive residence. I'm also not including some rare materials. You could squeeze dirt, called rammed earth, or just fill bags or old tires with common everyday dirt. You could use straw bales structurally. Maybe you could build with plastic or mushrooms. But good luck accessing supplies and people willing to work with them. Some people even make their homes out of used airplanes. But in this chart, I'm going to stick to the more common materials. It's ironic that we dig all these building materials, including steel and stone, out of the ground in order to build up. All that is except wood. Wood is already above ground, and so we can just make a tree house in it. Wood is a special building material because it's taking small minerals, which are just groups of atoms, out of the dirt and combining it with atoms from water and from the air, and using the power of sunlight and DNA, reconfiguring everything into new chemicals, such as cellulose and lignin. Cellulose is a type of sugar that's in a long chain, and lignin is the glue that holds all of the chains of cellulose together. Wood needs help from living things in the soil, and the whole process is as close to magic as I can imagine. Just for comparison, I've included some numbers. The top is the approximate compressive strength, or the strength when you're pushing down on it, and the bottom is the tensile strength, which is basically the force it would take to snap a stick of it in two. It doesn't really matter what the numbers are, they're not that accurate. For example, different species of wood will have different numbers. But since most of our houses are made of wood, and we know wood is strong and strong enough, the numbers will give us a feel for a material's strength as we fill in the chart. Next is clay. Clay is something you think you know it when you see it, but what's actually in it? What makes it clay instead of some other kind of dirt? Well, you're going to start off with a little bit of water that will later evaporate out, some metallic minerals, and very tiny particles. Aggregate is a poorly defined word as it relates to construction materials. Maybe it could be as small as a mineral or as large as a boulder. So there's some debate whether you'd call the grains in clay aggregate, but the point is that clay has grains smaller than grains of sand, and that's what makes something clayey instead of sandy. Clay has been a great building material for thousands of years. Wherever across the world there's mud, there's usually some clay. When you don't bake it, it's called cob or adobe. And when you do bake the water out, it's brick. Clay is very strong. It's definitely more brittle than wood, but excels in the compression strength that you'd need to carry weight from up high and into the ground. In other words, what you need to support a heavy roof. But basically, clay is dried mud. It can be a difficult material to use structurally, so if you're in America and you have this on your house, it's just for looks. Not only is it not supporting anything, but you have to add extra steps to support the brick. And now we're getting into the rock materials. Maybe it's surprising to you, but these rocks are every bit as organic as wood. It just takes millions of years and lots of pressure for the bones of these dead creatures to become limestone or chalk, not 40 years like a typical southern pine tree. Cement also contains clay, and everything is pulverized until it can pass through a sieve or screen that would retain water. Cement is not the same as concrete, but is usually the most expensive part of the next three variations. Because it takes so long for these rocks to form, and you have to cook the pulverized grains, some would say it's not the most renewable resource. There are some concretes that absorb carbon dioxide as they cure, but partly it has a bad reputation because it's so good. Cement products are the second most used product on the planet, right after water. Its use may predate agriculture. It has a really interesting story, and I'll place a link in the comments for a book I can't recommend enough called Concrete Planet. Although cement materials are very brittle in the tensile direction and require reinforcement, it is the king of compressive strength. When it dries, we've created a new rock, but in the shape we want. So typically, we mix cement with other things, and you'll hear these words tossed around. The first is grout. The aggregate size in grout is very small, bigger than clay, but we want it small so that it will flow easy and fill empty spaces. When grout dries, it fills any unwanted empty spaces and hardens into something very strong. But it doesn't bind things together like mortar does. Mortar is very similar to grout, and while some grouts can contain up to a tenth lime, lime is more characteristic of mortar. Lime is just a little extra limestone or chalk in the mix. Mortar holds blocks, bricks, and stones together and apart. However, mortar is intentionally the weakest part of a wall. That way, if there's any movement from the ground, and there always is, the mortar will crack before the structural block or brick will. That said, sometimes concrete blocks are just stacked on top of each other without mortar. I couldn't find the tensile strength of mortar, but it doesn't matter. There are different types of mortars with different strengths. The kind you'll typically find at the box store is type S. Concrete is the cement product we deal with the most. It typically will have much larger aggregates, in other words, visible rocks. There are all kinds of chemicals and fibers that sometimes are added to concrete to increase its strength, to increase or decrease the time it takes to harden, to give it color, to make it flow easier. There are many options when it comes to concrete, and it's very strong as a building material. With concrete, we can make concrete blocks that we can stack to form a wall. We can make concrete pillars and fill the gaps with some non-structural material. We can pour the entire wall all at once, either in a vertical form or on the ground and tilted up. So is Braac actually concrete, or is it more of a grout or mortar? The aggregate in AAC is very fine. You won't see any visible rocks or even grains of sand. The Portland Cement Association is an authoritative source, and they call it concrete, so I'll follow convention. If you want a good overview of Braac, I'll link to their website in the comments below. As I've said before, a structure is a serious investment of resources. Since I want to build a structure that will last a long time, building out of concrete rock seems like the best idea. Will Braac be as good as they say, or financially ruin me? We'll find out. On this channel, I'll compare different building materials and methods to find out which one is truly the best. It's an experiment, but one we need to do, because why are we here if not to build things better?